Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to teach you all the wakeboarding trick names and terms. At least 99% of them. I can't think of any others, so if you guys can think of any others, feel free to let me know and I'll make another video. And if this is your first time on my channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more water sports related content. The first thing I'm going to teach you is that there's a lot of inconsistencies with wakeboarding trick names, so you just have to accept the fact that wakeboarding trick names are dumb and then we can move forward. I actually made an entire series about that, making fun of wakeboarding trick names, so you can see that at the end of this video. But for now, let's get to it. And since this is going to be a long video and you may want to know a particular trick name, you can find the guide right here. So let's talk about your board and all of its features. For reference, this will be when you're riding right foot forward. Your board will have a nose, which is the leading tip in front of you, and it'll have a tail, which is the leading tip behind you. You follow the nose wherever it goes because you can't follow the tail, says John Hale. There's a toe side edge, which is the edge of the board that your toes are on, and a heel side edge, that's the side where your heels are on. The edges of your board are what steer your board left and right. There ain't no side like toe side, but heel side is the real side. So if you want to hit a wake or feature that's on your right and your left foot forward, you're going to be pushing downward on your toe side edge, so it'll be a toe side hit. If you want to hit a feature to your right and your right foot forward, it'll be a heel side hit because you're edging down on your heel side edge. You'll also have a lead hand and a trailing hand. So when I'm riding right foot forward, my lead hand will be my right hand because it's the hand that's closest to the nose of the board. My trailing hand will be my left hand because that'll be the hand furthest away from my board, closer to the tail, and vice versa. Now let's talk about stance real quick. The two directions you can ride in are left foot forward and right foot forward. If you naturally like to ride left foot forward, that's called regular, and if you naturally ride right foot forward, that's called goofy. When you have your unnatural foot forward, that's called switch. I recommend riding as much switch as possible so that you may have 99 problems, but riding switch ain't one. And now it's time to spin to win, or spin to have fun. I don't know what your goals are. Every time your body spins a half revolution, you add 180 degrees to the name. The spins in order are 180, 360, 540, 720, 900, 1080, 1260, etc. Additionally, rail riders are known to spin on and off rails in 90-degree increments. These include 90, 270, 450, 630, 810, 990, etc. There's two directions a wakeboard can spin in, front side and back side. So since the rider is always in the sideways position, you can tell which is which by whether the front of your body is facing the handle on the first 90 degrees of rotation, or whether your back is facing the handle in the first 90 degrees of rotation. So if your front is facing the handle, it's front side, and if your back is facing the handle, it's back side. In this video, you'll see all 8 variations of a 180. I'm naturally left foot forward, so if you're right foot forward, just keep in mind that your switch will be opposite of my switch. Now let's go over the spin terms. Handle pass is when you pass the handle from one hand to the other. Baller is when you pass the handle between the legs. A flatline spin or orbital is when you spin over the handle, requiring no handle pass. An ollie is when the rider spins underneath the handle. An osmosis is when a rider spins, lets go with one hand, and catches the handle with the same hand. A rewind is when a rider spins one direction, stops the rotation, and then spins the other direction. A shifty is when a rider spins a board 90 degrees in one direction and then 90 degrees back. And wrapped is when the rider has rope wrapped around their back to spin. Now let's talk about all the various riding positions. There's the normal riding position. There's cupped, which is having two hands on the handle behind your back. There's blind, which is just like cupped, but you're not holding on with your lead hand. Then there's a mummy wrap. To understand what a mummy wrap looks like, hold on to the handle with your trailing hand and do a backside 180. This will wrap the rope around your back. Now let's talk about surface tricks. A butterslide is when the rider turns their board frontside 90 degrees. A backside butterslide is when the rider turns their board backside 90 degrees. An ollie is when you get air by pushing off your back foot and lifting up on your front foot. And a tumble turn is when a rider places their back on the water, lifts their board out of the water, spins 360 degrees backside, and then places their feet back on the water and stands back up. Now let's talk about all the spin and flip variations, because it's always hip to flip. To begin, I thought it might be easier to distinguish the two types of flips. The best terms I can think of to describe these flips are rolls and cartwheels. Rolls are when you flip over your toes or your heels to make your board do a barrel roll. Very graceful. A cartwheel would be when you flip over your nose or your tail to make your board do a flip. Also very graceful. In the upcoming section, you'll see a list of tricks correlated to the edges and tips of your board. Keep in mind that sometimes a spinning flip and a spinning roll may have the same trick names because they look so similar. Also, in this portion of the video, I'm going to be talking about kicker hits, but just know that the same names apply if you're hitting a wick behind a boat. And to make this video a lot easier to understand, everything will be going off the right kicker. Just know that everything still applies if you're going off the left kicker and or wake. Alright, so we'll do this in clockwise order for every trick, starting from the top. Whenever you cartwheel over your nose, it's called a front flip. Whenever you roll over your heel side edge, it's called a tantrum. Whenever you cartwheel over your tail, it's called a back roll. And whenever you roll over your toe side edge, it's called a Mexican back roll or a Mexi roll. If you're on your toe side edge, cartwheeling over your nose is called a front flip. Rolling over your toe side edge is called a front roll. Cartwheeling over your tail is called a wildcat. And rolling over your heel side edge is called a back roll. Now let's go over all the flips if you do a 180 with it. If you're on your heel side edge and you cartwheel over the nose and do a front side 180, it's called a front to fakie. If you do a backside 180, it's called a front flip to blind or a Hasselhoff if it's switch. If you roll over your heel side edge and do a front side 180, it's called a tantrum to fakie. If you roll over your heel side edge and do a backside 180, it's called a tantrum to blind. If you cartwheel over your tail and do a front side 180, it's called a roll to revert. If you do it switch, it's called a half cab roll. And if you do it backside, it's called a roll to blind. And if you roll over your toe side edge, it has the exact same names as the tail. So you have roll to revert, half cab roll if it's switch, and roll to blind. If you're coming in on your toe side edge and you cartwheel over your nose and do a front side 180, it's called a scarecrow. If you do a backside 180, it's called a fruit loop. If you roll over your toes and do a front side 180, it's called a scarecrow. If you do a backside 180, it's called a tootsie roll. If you cartwheel over your tail and do a front side 180, it's called a roll to revert. And if you do a backside 180, it's called a roll to blind. If you roll over your heel side edge and do a front side 180, it's called a roll to revert. And if you do a backside 180, it's called a roll to blind. And now we're going to get into mobs. A mob is any flip with a handle pass 360. When you're on your heel side edge and you cartwheel over your nose and do a front side 360, it's called a slim chance. If it's switch, it's called a fat chance. And if you do a backside 360, it's called a backside front mob. If you roll over your heel side edge and do a front side 360, it's called a $1 billion baby. If you do a backside 360, it's called a Moby Dick. And if you do a backside 360 Olay, it's called a whirlybird. If you cartwheel over your tail and do a front side 360, it's called a back mob. And if you do a 360 backside, it's called a KGB. And the same applies over your toe side edge. When you spin front side, it's called a back mob, and when you spin backside, it's called a KGB. When you're on your toe side edge and you cartwheel over your nose and do a front side 360, it's called a crow mob. If you do a backside 360, it's called a flavor flip. If you roll over your toes and do a front side 360, it's also called a crow mob. If you do it switch, it's called a skeezer. And if you do a backside, it's called a dum-dum. If you cartwheel over your tail and do a front side 360, it's called a Pete Rose. And if you do a backside, it's called a blind Pete. And just like flips over your tail, your heel side edge will have the exact same tricks. So a front side 360 will be a Pete Rose. A switch front side 360 is called an X mob. And a backside 360 is called a blind Pete. And when you do a blind Pete in the cup position, it's called a Slurpee. Now that you've learned all the names of the mobs, all the names start to become easier to understand. And if you add a 180 to any mob, it'll be the name of that mob 540. Since all mobs have a 360 in them, the extra 180 turns it into a mob 540. Then mob 720, then mob 900, etc. Now let's talk about grabs. So for the grab this, we're going to go through all the names when your right foot is forward. We'll start with our trailing hand, work our way clockwise, and then we'll do the same for our lead hand, starting from the top. When you grab the toe side edge of your board with your trailing hand, it's called an Indy. When you grab the nose of your board with your trailing hand, it's called a Crail. When you reach all the way around past the nose and grab your heel side edge, it's called a nuclear grab. When you reach behind and grab your heel side edge, it's called a stalefish. If you grab a little bit lower, it's called a tailfish, which is frowned upon. If you grab all the way to your tail of your board, it's called a tail grab. And if you grab in between Indy and tail, it's called a Tindy, which is also frowned upon. Now when you're grabbing with your lead hand, if you grab the toe side edge of your board, it's called a mute grab. When you grab the nose of your board, it's called a nose grab. If you grab the heel side edge of your board, it's called a melon grab. And when you do a backside shifty with it, it's called a method. When you grab the tail of your board, it's called a seat belt. And here's some complex grabs you can try. Starting from the top with your trailing hand, if you grab in between your legs towards your toe side edge, it's called a Canadian bacon. If you grab in between your legs on your heel side edge, it's called a roast beef. With your lead hand, when you grab in between your legs towards your toe side edge, it's called a taipan. And when you grab in between your legs on your heel side edge, it's called a chicken salad. Now if you can grab both hands on the nose of your board, that is called a rocket air. Now let's talk about rail moves. The first part of every rail trick name is either front or back. This is determined by whether your front is facing the rail on the approach or if your back is facing the rail on the approach. An easy way to remember this is that edging in toe side into a rail is always front and edging in heel side into a rail is always back. If your nose goes over the rail, it's called a board slide, and if your tail goes over the rail, it's called a lip slide. If your lead foot stays in front, it's called a 50-50. When we place them all together, we have front 50-50, back 50-50, front board, front lip, and back lip. These are all the fundamentals of riding on a rail, but let's talk about some other terms. A zeech is when the board is not solidly locked into the previously mentioned positions. This is when the board is at a 45-degree angle between 50-50 and board slide, or 50-50 and lip slide. It's not the end of the world if you find yourself in one of these positions, Just know that it's frowned upon in contests and video parts. A nose press is when you ride in the 50-50 position, but you shift your weight forward onto your nose so that only your nose is on the rail. A tail press is when you ride in the 50-50 position and you shift your weight towards the tail so only your tail is on the rail. A wheelie is very similar to a tail press, but your nose is much higher and the very tip of your tail is the only thing touching the rail. Alright, so now let's talk about some advanced rail terms. A pretzel is when a rider pops off a board slide or lip slide 270 degrees opposite the direction that they popped on. Same way as when you spin 270 degrees in the same direction that you spin on. This is also called a bagel. It's even referred to as a Danish. A hard way spin is when you spin in the same direction as you would for a lip slide. A tail slide is similar to a lip slide or board slide, but only the tail is on the feature. Think 90-degree tail press. A nose slide is similar to a board slide or lip slide, but only the nose is on the feature. Think 90 degrees nose press. A blunt slide is when the rider's lead foot passes over the rail on the approach, with the wakeboard traveling perpendicular and their trailing foot directly above the feature, like a tail slide. A nose blunt is when the rider's trailing foot passes over the rail on the approach, with their wakeboard traveling perpendicular and their lead foot directly above the feature, like a nose slide. Switch-ups or change-ups are when you switch between tricks without jumping off the box or rail. An MJ, also known as Michael Jackson, is when you ride with only your toe side edge of your board on the feature. An HJ is when you ride with only your heel side edge of your board on the feature. A nollie is just like an ollie, but instead of jumping off your back foot, you jump off your lead foot. Now let's talk about air tricks. An air trick is when a rider flicks their board on the flat surface of the water and propels themselves into the air. An air tantrum is called a bel air. An air whirlybird is called a tweety bird. And an air scarecrow is called an egg roll. All the other air tricks still have the same names as you would on a standard kicker or wake. There are a bunch of additional railie-based tricks that you can do as an air trick. Railies are basically when you place your board into a Superman position. Starting with all the toe side air trick names we have, a toe side railie with an indie grab is called a bat wing. A toe side railie frontside 360 is called a 90210. A toe side air railie frontside 540 is called an O-Railie. And a toe side railie backside 180 is called a bat wing to blind. Now to go over all the heel side air railie base tricks. There's the heel side railie. The heel side railie with a shifty is called a 911. A heel side railie with a frontside 180 is called a crypt. A heel side railie with a 360 is called a 313. A heel side railie with a 540 is called a 515. A heel side railie with a backside 180 is called a blind judge. A heel side railie with an Olay backside 360 is called an S-bend. An S-bend with a frontside 180 is called a Vulcan. An S-bend with a frontside 360 is called an S-mobe. And an S-bend with a backside 360 is called a heart attack. And there you have it. That's every single wakeboard trick name and term, at least all the ones that I can think of. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below and I will answer them as quickly as possible. Or if you can think of any trick names I haven't mentioned, please let me know and I will probably make another video if there's enough of them. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching and I will catch you guys in the next video.